the supernatural, something that has fascinated people for centuries and has taken many, many different forms, such as warriors that fight against the very dark forces that make up most of the supernatural, like Satoru Gojo, the one and only Honored One, or the very demon spawned of those dark forces, Wickedness Incarnate, Nightmare. These two supernatural competitors will be fighting each other to the death in this video. I'll be using information from all available sources for them that are considered canon, or at the very least, soft canon. And throughout the entire video, I will be using anything that is consistent enough to be used, meaning major outliers, stuff that is based almost entirely on theories that can't be backed up at all, won't be used. Obviously, Nightmare has to rely on some theories. He is a FNAF character, and a FNAF character that is, well, vague is an understatement. So for this, we will be using a theory that is a hybrid of multiple theories, as it is the closest thing to a story that we can really give the character. I will, of course, go over how different theories could change the outcome at the end of the video. These fighters can bend the rules of physics like tissue paper, and are no stranger to threats that can threaten cities, countries, and over time, potentially even the planet itself. But in the end, only one of them will stand at the end of this. The early 80s in an unassuming small American town. In this town lives a boy whose full name is unknown. All we really do know about this boy's name is that his last name is Afton. We are, of course, talking about the crying child, son of everybody's favorite narcissistic, sadistic, and psychopathic, or if you're feeling spicy, sociopathic serial killer. The purple guy, William Afton. Yeah, with a father like that, I don't think you can expect a very good childhood, but even with that, his childhood was still worse than you'd probably assume. On one hand, it's, I guess, a kind of blessing that he wasn't treated like a literal animal, but to have an older brother who seems to devote every second of his life to being a petty little dickhead and scaring the shit out of you, to the point where you have night terrors every single night, is still not a fate I'd like to have. And having a little sister that doesn't seem to really give a shit, and a mom that is so depressed in being in a marriage with a literal monster that she spends her entire day watching a TV, not even breaking up her husband, clearly abusing her older son eventually. Yeah, to say his family life wasn't exactly heaven is more than an understatement. Even through all that, Evan, for the most part, had a pseudo-normal childhood when he wasn't at his home, and his family did seemingly keep up quite a mask to hide the horrible conditions many of the members of that family faced. With his father, William Afton, playing a somewhat charismatic, even at points seemingly kind, person when he was out in public. Of course, hiding the alcoholic, psychotic, and often very, very angry man that he really was at home. To rub salt into this very depressing childhood, he also had no friends. Well, no human friends. The children often picked on him outside of his house. It's likely his school life wasn't exactly great. And his brother's friends, who were significantly older than him and had no business picking on a little kid, were also extremely, extremely, extremely bad to him. Though he did have unconventional friends. A group of plushies modeled after animatronics that he was actually terrified of when he saw the real deals, though one of them most certainly stood out from the rest. One that would whisper to him, warn him, talk to him, and seemingly, for a while, protect him. That being the plush of Fredbear, the mascot of Fredbear's Family Diner, the precursor to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza's full restaurants, and most likely the inspiration for Freddy Fazbear eventually, with them being very similar in how they look, act, and are as characters. This small plushie didn't seem to be anything normal, though it's been long theorized that this was an imaginary friend, or something that his father used to keep track of him via a walkie-talkie or radio that he would have inside of it. These theories do go against what we know of Afton. Afton had his oldest son watch his youngest son because he really didn't care. Afton wasn't a guy who seemed to give too much about his family. Afton was a man that was focused on his work. His only real thing that he seemed to really care about was his own ego. He was a narcissist. Something that many, many people have picked up on through just his voice lines alone. The only thing he truly cared about was a rivalry with his arch-rival and the father of one of his first, if not his first victim, Henry Emily. Afton was not a man that would spend his entire day talking through a radio to talk to his son, nor would he have used illusion discs to scare his kid in the middle of the night. We know he did use something similar, that being fear gas, and potentially illusion discs in tandem with it, but that was much later, on children that were not his own, children that he stole through use of other animatronics. No, this thing did most likely give him the idea for those things, though. Those little plushies with the radios in them, that he would use to mimic the experience his son had. The experiences that would lead to the plushie itself becoming possessed. He would use the idea of his son suffering to try to harvest agony. But there was something made from the agony first. Something that was alive and very much aware of what was going on. Something that had taken a plushie and made it into a very much breathing, living thing. That thing would take on many names and many different forms throughout time, though for now, we'll just refer to it as Plush Bear. Plush Bear was far from a powerhouse, only being born of the emotions of a single child, meaning he wouldn't even scale to the full power of even the weakest child's soul. Though, for what he lacked in power, he made up for in clear intelligence. Most entities and spirits in FNAF are very animalistic. Sure, they have some level of intelligence, but for the most part, most of them are not human level in terms of intelligence. This is something that has been stated many times, even by higher up spirits. So Plush Bear was clearly at least human intelligence. He could speak pretty fluid English and knew of things that only really a human could know about. Though he could not save the crying child from what was coming. You see, he could not yet interact with the physical world very well. He was still just a living, sometimes teleporting, sometimes shape-shifting plushie. Or at the very least, he may have not wanted to help against what was coming. On the crying child's birthday, at Fredbear's family diner, his older brother and his friends decided to play a prank on him by picking the little kid up and putting his head in the mouth of the massive 7-foot-tall, well over 300-pound, spring-lock animatronic Fredbear. And due to the child's tears, which weakened the spring locks, which are susceptible to moisture, its jaws slammed shut. Jaws that can tear straight into human flesh, bite people in half, and crush bones. Needless to say, he died to the face of the only friend he ever had. This event would leave his older brother traumatized. His father would become even more alcoholic, even more aggressive, and would start a killing spree, starting with Charlotte Emily, a little girl and daughter of his arch-rival, right outside the very family diner that his son had died in. And it would only get worse from there. This event would also affect Plush Bear. This agony creature that up to this point had essentially just been the spawn of a child's fear and agony and all sorts of negative emotions, now didn't have its original source, didn't have the only thing it had up to this point interacted with. It's unclear if this thing actually felt bad. In fact, it's never really explained any of its emotions towards this. What is clear, though, is intentional or not, it definitely tried to get revenge for what happened to the crying child by attacking his brother in his dreams night after night after night. It's unclear exactly how these dreams went down, but they were, most likely, the inspiration for Afton's fear experiments later on. Experiments that this same entity would be present for. In these nightmares, it would take a form reminiscent of the very thing that took its creator's life. That form would be a dark, semi-translucent creature resembling a twisted, terrifying version of Fredbear. This entity would take on a new name, that being Nightmare. Standing at roughly 15 feet tall, by most estimates, as it is larger than Fredbear, who has estimates of around 13 feet, and significantly taller than Nightmarion, or Nightmarionette, who stands at around 9 feet in most frames, though his size can change, and he can actually change it canonically. In most official art, he is shown as taller than Nightmare Fredbear, who is 13.5 feet. At this point, Nightmare was beginning to learn to utilize not just agony, but all manner of emotional and spiritual energies. Everything from Dark Remnant to Remnant he could utilize in some way, shape, or form. Though agony creatures do have a susceptibility to positive emotions, and Remnant itself, they can still technically control them and manipulate them. It's just they are extra effective against negative emotions and Dark Remnant, though Dark Remnant and negative emotions can also be just as effective back. So they're kind of like fire and water in a way. Nightmare does not have a physical form. He is a non-physical entity. While it is true that some agony creatures can be affected physically, in most cases they are possessing a physical form outside their true form to do so. So, though it is theoretically possible to hit Nightmare with a physical attack, he would have to let you do so. Though he could always interact with physical things. Nightmare is also made completely of emotions, mainly dark ones. That is why Nightmare, like Eleanor, is not really a standard being. They don't really have a soul. They have something like one, but not quite a soul. Kind of like curses, but a little different at the same time. Nightmare is also a being that doesn't abide by physics for the most part. That's not to say he ignores them or transcends them, just stuff like gravity and other things along those lines don't usually affect him unless he wants them to. That is why some versions of shadow creatures can just levitate and fly, which Nightmare can also do. And of course, he has the very dangerous and very powerful Agony Nightmare ability. By forcing agony into your mind, or by simply putting you to sleep, which they can actually do, or even just causing illusions in the real world that can actually physically hurt you if you believe them, he can invade your mind and put you in essentially a different universe. Not a literal physical one, though there is ways he might be able to do something similar to that. It's never confirmed if he can do so, if that's an Eleanor exclusive, so we won't give him the ability to make his own realm unless hyper-amped, as he realistically shouldn't be on Eleanor's level, even by the end of the series. But ignoring that, Nightmare can put you in a nightmare. I know, shocking. These nightmares are heavily implied to be what happens in the Ultimate Custom Night game, and especially implied to be what happens in the Man in the Room story. Essentially, agony floods your brain, and it puts you into your personal hell. You can die in here. You can easily die in here, or he can keep you alive indefinitely with the agony keeping you breathing. This is most likely what he did to Michael, just on a slightly less intense level. And we know he likely kept this up for a very long time as Shadow Freddy, which is Nightmare, as the game files that Scott knows people read basically confirm it. And it is actually implied that shadow creatures, shadow animatronics, are agony creatures through Shadow Bonnie, who is just like Shadow Freddy. Yeah, Nightmare follows him everywhere he goes. He also follows Afton everywhere Afton goes. In every single game, Shadow Freddy is there, or was there canonically. In FNAF 1, though he doesn't appear in the game, we know through minigames, which are canon, contrary to some people's belief, that Nightmare is in fact there, helping Afton. He is the trap that Henry mentions in one of his speeches. Yeah, he lures animatronics to Afton, for Afton to disassemble them. Yes, there is a guide that claims that he was trying to help them. This guide also claims a lot of things that Scott has never confirmed. So it's unclear if that's even canon. Therefore, I'm not using it here, as it goes against a lot of things that we know about agony creatures in every other source, including things written by Scott himself. Shadow Freddy directly watches Michael and other characters in FNAF 2, showing up around the same time Afton killed several children, likely feeding off the agony and possibly already helping Afton at this point in the story. It takes the form of Withered Freddy, or Withered Golden Freddy, who is basically just a less nightmare version of his already very nightmarish form. Nightmare can also make the other nightmare animatronics appear. That is something he's capable of doing, as just like Eleanor, he can create things, like out of nothing. be it in a nightmare or even in the real world if he really wanted to. This is something that is actually shown in Security Breach with Nightmarionette, who is also Nightmare. Not only they're literally referred to as by the same name in multiple games, but they have the exact same origin in how they talk about their origins. And they have the exact same function as characters. So, unless you think that they just have two characters with the same name, as Nightmarionette's name has been retconned to Nightmare, it's unlikely that they're not the same guy, especially considering they're both very clearly agony creatures related to things Afton has done. And Nightmarionette has the exact same eyes as Shadow Freddy, who we know as Nightmare. Shadow Freddy would pop up again in FNAF 3, directly beside Michael. Some people do believe that he is literally dead here because his eyes aren't glowing, but I mean, Golden Freddy's eyes are barely ever glowing, and is Golden Freddy dead in FNAF 1? I'd say not. So I don't think that means he's literally dead. Or, like, low on power or anything. If anything, he's at one of his strongest points in this game because he's been feeding on Michael for so long. And he's probably been feeding off Afton, too. In fact, we know he's empowered by evil, just as Afton is. Just as all agony creatures are. That's kind of their thing. And he's also being empowered by all the many, many, many negative emotions that Michael feels the entire game. He would pop up again in Sister Location as the Fredbear plush, staring directly at Michael, still. And then he would pop up again in FNAF 6 in a minigame, showing the ability to rapidly clone himself, which isn't something new for agony creatures. And then he would pop up again in Ultimate Custom Night, invading the dream that is caused by either Cassidy or Andrew, depending on which timeline you like, and being there to help torment Afton. And he would continue popping up, even showing up in Security Breach as Nightmarionette, and many, many Nightmare plushes that exist not just in the physical world, but in digital ones as well, implying that he exists in every single one of them, and the reason they're watching Gregory is for whatever reason, he's watching him. My personal theory is maybe he sees Gregory as a second crying child, as he does share a pretty striking resemblance to him. Maybe it's just curiosity, maybe there's something darker at play. Either way, he doesn't really do anything impressive other than very clearly infecting all the wiring throughout the entire Pizzaplex in the game, as we see them as Nightmarian tendrils at points. And then also, he took over all the Nightmare staff bots, which is kind of obvious if you look at him. He's most likely there to feed off the agony of the Tangle or Blob, and probably also interested in Burn Trap or the Mimic or anything like that. He really just seems to go wherever Afton or Afton's legacy leads him. This is something that backs him following Michael, though, as this is the only time he wouldn't be where Michael is, because Michael is most likely dead now. Like all agony creatures, Nightmare can take many forms, some of which we've already talked about. But he should also be able to make avatars of himself, which is most likely what the Nightmare animatronics are. Much like Eleanor, he could take some also fairly varied forms. Though obviously his base state would have access to basically all of his abilities. Eleanor also has that same thing, where she has access to all of her abilities in base. Some of her states show abilities that she never shows in base, most likely because she felt she didn't need to, or it would cost too much energy. Or maybe it just fit that thing more than it fits her. Regardless, the avatars are weaker than the host, so scaling Nightmare to some of her creations isn't too big of a stretch, given that he is feeding on agony from some of the biggest events in FNAF throughout the entire story. Though I wouldn't say he's equal to her, I wouldn't say he's anywhere short of the second strongest agony creature in the verse by the end of it. So, what can Nightmare do? Well, he could summon massive storms. Eleanor was able to summon a massive storm that was able to travel fairly fast, and she could do so repeatedly as the Blackbird. He should be able to react at speeds as fast, if not faster, than the Blackbird. And things that the Blackbird can actually react faster than, such as characters that can react within a nanosecond, which has been calculated anywhere between 1 to 3 times the speed of light. This is due to how humans react typically. So if we take a average, say, 6'4" person, talk about their standard dodge, assuming you could dodge within a nanosecond. If you scale this up to Nightmare, who should be able to do the same, his maximum movement speed is potentially over 9 times the speed of light, with a general range of 8 to 10. Though you can argue lower or potentially higher due to the multipliers he gets and also his potential scaling to a full power Eleanor, and in fact a character that is reacting at this speed isn't as fast as the Blackbird, he should still be extremely fast. And sure, you can argue if he's this fast, why can't he just speed blitz you in the games? Well, he can if he gets through the door, for one. And for two, again, he's toying with you. He's feeding on your negative emotions. He's not necessarily trying to kill you. It's only if you mess up that he kind of just does it anyway. Nightmare also generally should be more powerful than any normal animatronic that isn't an Agni creature or an extremely powerful remnant user like Charlotte. Meaning characters that can casually break children's bones, bite through skulls, bite people in half, casually dismember people, crush people, rip them in half like a wishbone, shock people with enough energy to blow a building up, unironically, slam straight through steel doors, dent steel doors, drain massive amounts of power from a building comparable to the amount of energy that can blow up a building, drain enough power over a week to blow up a large building, like I'm talking skyscrapers, drain even more power than that and potentially blow up like a city block, causing a cave-in over time, bash in characters that can run through walls' heads, survive explosions that can blow up a trailer, and a lot more. Most of this is actually fairly casual as well. He upscales all of that and more. He would also scale to Human Afton, who can rip apart characters like this with his bare hands. He would also potentially scale to Springtrap, who's just stronger than that, and can cause illusions in the real world, and has agony hacks. He should have some of the abilities of the Stitch Wraith, though not all of them, meaning he can decay your soul if he gets a good touch on you. Yeah, he can do that. Nightmare's also a character that has basically all the basic agony hacks. He can control the elements, blast water, cause rain, electrocute you, control lightning, drain power, all those types of things. He has a bite that is actually venomous and it can kill people and somehow even infects electronics. He can invade digital worlds. He can possess people fairly easily, including multiple people at once. He can steal your body. He can rip your soul out. He can basically just drain energies that are anything spiritual or emotional. He can detect what emotions you're feeling. He can see through basically anything. He can teleport. He can dismember himself and teleport each part individually. He can survive being basically obliterated. And he can do a lot more. He can do attacks such as Fourth Wall that can bypass almost any defense. Yeah, he's kind of insane. Like, the amount of stuff he can do is second to almost nobody. And within one of his nightmares, or potentially a realm if he gets amped, he can do whatever he wants. He's essentially a god in that realm. He can make time stand still in that realm compared to the outside, or vice versa. He can control how the events work in that realm. He can create avatars, both in the real or nightmare worlds. He can bend reality in the spiritual world. He can actually take you to the spiritual world technically, and he can harm your physical form if you're in there. He can actually separate your soul from your body and put it in the spiritual world if he wanted to. This is something that other characters like Eleanor can do. He can just put you to sleep. It's never explained how, but agony creatures can just put people to sleep. Cool. They can survive being essentially erased entirely, as their presence will remain still within the entity's mind unless it's destroyed there too. At least that's how it's implied to work. They can really just do anything they really want to. And the full power of agony creatures is never fully explained. Eleanor never shows off what she's truly capable of, but Nightmare is capable of most of what she can do, just not all of it. Nightmare is in many ways just a weaker, but arguably smarter version of her. She's implied smarter than Afton, but Nightmare has to be smarter than Afton too. He outlasted him, played him, and stole a lot of his power. It's unclear how Nightmare's personality really is, but what we do know is he is power hungry. He likes to take a lot of energy from a lot of horrible events. Not a fan of Michael. Probably liked the Crying Child, as he doesn't instantly attack Gregory, most likely just off the fact that he looks like the Crying Child and was actually attempting to help him. And may or may not have been involved in the fear experiments which resulted in the deaths of countless children. We'll ignore that part. Anyways, Nightmare has most likely drained obscene amounts of agony throughout his lifespan, meaning that his power has only grown from each instance of his appearance, and his abilities have only grown more complex. He should be capable of almost anything that other agony creatures can do, besides some of what Eleanor can do, meaning stuff like creating agony gases that can damage people, stuff like flying, stuff like shape-shifting, stuff like teleporting to different realms instantly. All of that he can do. And outside that, even without all of that, physical stats, Nightmare isn't a pushover either. He's still a 15, or at the bare minimum 19 foot, super heavy monster that you can't physically attack. But his claws can most certainly damage you. Though even with all that, Nightmare isn't without weaknesses. Like many creatures within the FNAF universe, he is particularly not pleased with light. It doesn't physically harm him, usually, but it is shown to deter him. Or at the very least, he lets it deter him. Most animatronics are either physically damaged or blinded by it, whereas Nightmare just seems to be annoyed. Either way, light isn't something he's necessarily a fan of, and he would prefer to not fight during day. Though other agony creatures have shown to be just fine during the daytime, and Nightmare himself has as well through Plush Bear. So it's more likely than not just either part of his game or something he's not particularly fond of. Positive energies, or Remnant, particularly really powerful emotions mixed with Remnant, such as stuff that the puppet is capable of producing, can damage or potentially even kill Nightmare permanently, as they can kill very powerful agony users and agony creatures, such as Afton. So, if you are capable of producing very, very powerful positive energy, there is a chance it could kill Nightmare, though it's not a perfect way to end him. He is still capable of absorbing manipulating energy. Nightmare also isn't just filled by agony, he's filled by any emotion or spiritual energy he can absorb. And he can absorb other energies, such as heat or electricity. Really anything that is energy he could technically just take. Though he's not immune to all of it in terms of damage, anything that's physical he's fine against, but spiritual energies can harm him. He can still utilize it. Though like all agony creatures, he is mostly fueled by the suffering of humans or living things in general. All the pain, all the death, all the fear. Anything like that, Nightmare can absorb. But his favorite thing is, of course, agony. He could, of course, exploit his opponent or anything around him to get more. The exact amp agony gives a creature isn't exactly known, but even Eleanor, a very powerful agony creature, is shown to get substantially more powerful off even a single person, so Nightmare should be no different. And Nightmare himself has already absorbed tons of agony from many, many, many poor victims throughout his long, long history. Overall, Nightmare said it best. He's Afton's wickedness made flesh. All the doubt, all the guilt, all the shame that Afton may have hidden under that rotting corpse in the animatronic shell that was only ever let out for a very small amount of time against his own son that he would never even admit to having, isn't there in Nightmare. Nightmare is only the sick and twisted parts of a sick and twisted man, mixed with all the pain, all the suffering, and all the torment of his many, many victims. Nightmare is a scar left by Afton that will never heal, a living, breathing embodiment of the legacy of the Afton family left behind. Even though Afton himself may be gone, his very shadow rose up to take his place. December 7th, 1989, the day that Satoru Gojo was born. Automatically from birth, his mere presence shifted the entire balance of power of everything within the cursed world, quote-unquote. Essentially, him existing was enough to shift the balance of an entire power system. Yeah, he started out a little more powerful than Nightmare. Quick warning, obviously, there's going to be spoilers for Jujutsu Kaisen. If you're a show-only watcher, you might want to just skip to the fight. If you're not, and you just know nothing about the series but want to get into it, I'll try to keep this as spoil-free as possible, but obviously big parts of the story are going to be covered because they're important for scaling. So I'll try to keep some of the specifics out. I won't go over everything Gojo's ever done. I'll try to keep as whole story very vague. In fact, I'm not even going to go over a lot of it because, unlike Nightmare, whose series has been around since like 2014, Jujutsu Kaisen's relatively newer. So I'll try to keep it as vague as possible, but be warned, there are obviously still spoilers. With that out of the way, let's talk about Gojo. Gojo is a lot. To fully explain everything he is would take a while. All you really need to know is he has a very powerful bloodline. It gives him a lot of very powerful abilities. He is technically a teacher. He's trained some of the strongest characters in his verse. He's fought the strongest character in his verse, ignoring a certain manga that might change that, but he's also repeatedly fought some of the other high tiers in his verse and defeated pretty much every one of them he's won up against 1v1. He has one of the biggest histories in his verse. Obviously, as previously mentioned, his power automatically shifted the power system of his verse. And a lot more. He also has some of the most broken abilities in his verse for obvious reasons. It's like a meme by now. So let's just talk about some of these abilities. For starters, he's extremely skilled in melee combat. One of the most skilled melee combatants in the verse. I'm going to say that quite a bit in this video. He can fistfight and outmaneuver characters that are generally just the most skilled. And he's done this multiple times. Like the time he punched a relatively high tier character so hard, they felt it for a month. No, literally. Or the time, well, actually nerfed and weakened, he beat the absolute shit out of Maharaga. One of the strongest characters in the verse. Or how about that time he fought Sukuna in a 1v1 for like ever and was actually winning for the vast majority of the fight. Until Sukuna pulled the classic little, oh, I have a new ability now card. Needless to say, Gojo is also very, very, very fast. Ignoring some of the higher wank ends that I'll get into by the end of the video. Nightmare has some too, don't worry. Let's talk about what we know he can react to. Well, characters like Sukuna can literally climb a light speed attack at a similar speed to the speed of the attack. I don't think I really need to elaborate on how impressive that is. And Gojo is actually as fast, if not faster than Sukuna for a lot of their fight. Yes, Sukuna is stronger at this point, but he's also constantly getting nerfed and buffed throughout that fight, so it's tricky to pinpoint where Gojo was skilled. Generally speaking, Gojo would still be able to fight Sukuna at that point. If he'd win is a different story, but he'd still be able to fight Sukuna, and he'd still be able to react to him, and again, he was arguably faster than Sukuna prior. So, there's that. Anyway, Sukuna, well, not at his best, was still able to dodge EM waves, which travel at light speed, typically. Reaction speeds for this have been calculated all over the place, but generally 3 times speed of light, so somewhere around 4 to 5 even, are the most accepted ones I've seen. Some people have it lower, some people have it higher. 3 to 5 is where it seems to get at. And remember how I mentioned his bloodline gave him some crazy stuff earlier? Well, one of the most obvious things is the 6 eyes. For starters, he sees everything around him, kind of like Superman's X-ray vision. Not exactly the same, but eerily similar. Except it's always on and he can't turn it off. That's why he wears a blindfold or some sort of eye covering typically. It actually reduces the strain on his eyes. Because his eyes are obviously pretty susceptible to strain given the fact that they can see things at the atomic level. He can see cursed techniques, he can see cursed energy, he could probably see souls, which I'm pretty sure he's confirmed to be able to see souls. Cursed energy is already very similar to souls. He can see anything that he really wants to. He can determine how a curse technique works just by looking at it. He can analyze things down to almost any level. And he could basically see all the way around him at all times if he really wanted to. Yeah, they're kind of crazy. They also limit his usage of curse energy to basically 0. Meaning under normal circumstances he would never run out of energy. And actually uses far less in his standard attacks than anyone else, despite his attacks being just as potent. Gojo is also one of the strongest characters in the series, and pretty consistently in the top 2. Some people might put him 3rd for some reason. I've seen people do that. Generally, he's at least 2nd. Some people think he's 1st. Regardless, he has skills like almost everything. So let's get into that. Some characters can make mountains. Some characters can nuke cities. Multiple characters can nuke cities, actually. Multiple characters can actually, well, one character can make not a mountain, but a full island. Some characters can cause earthquakes. One character made a black hole, though he shouldn't scale to this because his hacks ability is not something that anyone really scales to, as I'll explain later. The main point of it is it's a hacks ability, not a sheer AP thing. It's not something caused by the cursed energy just being that powerful. It's how the cursed technique itself works. Nobody in the series should scale to that level of power, especially not the character that did it. If you've read the manga, you know why that character doesn't scale to that ability. So there's your reasoning. Regardless, yeah, Gojo can do a lot, and his abilities help with that a lot. Melee combat, if Gojo applies his cursed energy within 1/millionth of a second, he can perform the Black Flash, a phenomenon that basically amplifies his cursed energy by the power of 2.5. This also will put Gojo in a sort of zone where his power gets amplified even further, and can also amp his reverse curse technique. Reverse curse technique is essentially regeneration for Gojo. He uses this pretty constantly on his brain, refreshing it with positive energy, which helps a lot when half of his abilities would cook his brain without it, and is something that helps pretty substantially in his stamina for fights. Of course, we also have Gojo's main ability, Limitless, starting off with the first form of it, Infinity. It is usually described with the Achilles and the tortoise paradox. Essentially, when something goes to hit Gojo, something he's aware of that can be anything, so long as it's above the atomic level, potentially even lower than the atomic level, he has to be aware of it at the very least. It depends on your interpretation. It acts as infinite space. Not literally, it slows everything down by half for every movement it makes, but it does functionally act as an infinite space barrier between him. He's not literally making infinite space, but it sure as hell feels like it. This is why he can basically never be hit. It's also always active, and he's trained it to pick up on things without him even needing to register it himself. So it's essentially a near-perfect defense, one that has really almost never been bypassed in the series besides one time. Next we have Blue. Essentially, Gojo makes tiny little voids, and the universe fills them. Does that sound confusing? It probably should. They're kind of like pseudo-black holes. Not quite a black hole or singularity, but close. They're not nearly as powerful, but they function very similarly, so we'll kind of compare them. He has multiple forms of this. He can shoot them as tiny little orbs. He can just put one inside you and then make it basically expand and kill you instantly, or take your limbs off. He can also use this to teleport, or teleport you, or teleport multiple things, or teleport himself and multiple things at the same time, because why couldn't he? He can utilize it in a far more powerful version, essentially making a mini black hole, though it isn't as powerful as a black hole, as it functions differently. It's still the same general idea, and he can move this around to deal extra damage. He can also use it in tandem with Red to use another stupidly overpowered technique, but I'll get into that later. And he can amplify his punches with this by essentially putting the void in between his fist and you, and then it pulls both of you into it. His fist and whatever he's hitting. I don't think I need to explain why that would hurt really bad. If he gets a black flash with that, ouchies. That's all I can say. Yeah, Blue is pretty broken, and he could probably use it even more ways. It's just he takes time to learn how to use them in different ways. He's very good at adaptation. One of the best characters at adaptation, and one of the smartest characters in the series when it comes to combat. His battle IQ is pretty insane, and he's adapted pretty insanely before. He's a genius when it comes to combat. So he could potentially just learn new abilities even mid-fight, even midway through this fight even. Next we have the opposite of Blue. When he multiplies his cursed energy by itself, he gets an attack twice as powerful, though far less versatile. That is Red. He can use Red in a variety of ways still, not nearly as many, but there is at least 3 versions of it. He can use it in a sort of pulse from his finger. He can also use it as a projectile, or he can use it as a delayed sort of time bomb. All of these are the same thing. They blast everything away at an atomic level. And they're twice as powerful as Blue tends to be. They are something that he doesn't always use too often, though in ranged combat they are one of his better options. And obviously it's still pretty powerful, and is shown to be more powerful than Blue typically in the manga, and even in the show to a degree. When he mixes them together, he gets Hollow Purple, a even more powerful attack. There are multiple interpretations of how it works, so I'll go over the 2 biggest ones. First one is the comparison to tachyons, something that is pretty well backed and heavily implied. Tachyons move faster than light, and they do pretty stupid damage if they were real things. For reference, Silver Samurai from Marvel uses them. If you know anything about how his attacks work, you know how broken tachyons are. Now imagine a big-ass orb of them flying at you. Yeah, that's not going to be fun. This is also obviously stronger than red and blue in terms of pure AP, making it one of, if not the strongest attack in the series. He can amplify it even further depending on how he activates it. There is one method he can utilize, which essentially makes it completely unbounded, and it's just a massive area of effect attack that can deal stupid damage. Obviously, it affects you on the anatomic and potentially even subatomic level. If it's tachyons, it would be subatomic. So it's pretty broken. There's another interpretation that implies that it simply erases things from existence. This has been contested with Sukuna not getting erased from existence, but you can still argue it could. So it'll be considered for this, but even the creator doesn't seem to know how it works 100%, so it's kind of up for interpretation. Gojo also has more defensive abilities, such as the new Shadow Style, which allows him to temporarily block off the sure-hit effects of a domain. How useful this would be against a character that doesn't, by default, have a domain, I don't know, but it's something he can do. He also has the simple domain, which is that, but a lot better, is the best way I can describe it. They're both pretty good in terms of the Jujutsu Kaisen verse. Also has Falling Blossom Emotion, which does something very similar, but in a different way, and is also extremely useful. So he has 3 other defensive things on top of probably the best barrier in Jujutsu Kaisen by a mile. He also has the Unlimited Void. Interpretations of how this works also vary. Some people claim that it floods the person's mind with infinite information. Some people claim it floods the person's mind with all the information around endlessly. Other people claims it floods the person's mind with around a couple years. 2.5 seems to be the general consensus of information per second. It varies wildly. Regardless, it stuns people really bad. Curses are slightly resistant to it due to different not really biology, but just the fact that they're so different from humans, that their brains are completely different. They're a little resistant to it, and they recover a little bit faster, but they still get stunned. Regardless, this ability is incredibly powerful, one of the strongest domain expansions in the verse, with probably the strongest sure hit in the verse, with there only being maybe 2 that rival it off the top of my head. Gojo can use this ability in different ways as well. He can change the properties of it to counter different domains. He can activate it for very brief amounts of time, like to basically hit the effect very quickly, then go in for another attack. He can do a lot of things, such as shrinking it down, etc. This ability has been countered before by attacking the domain from the outside, so characters that can do that do have an edge here, though it's still stunning them while they're in there, so there's that as well. It's a obscenely broken ability, and obviously it has sure hit like every other domain, meaning Gojo can attack you and you're going to get hit regardless within his domain. And he's also at his best while in his domain as well, so there's that as well. Though Gojo isn't all strengths, overuse of any technique can fry parts of his brain, as seen in the manga. In fact, overuse of his abilities in general can be very straining on him, despite his extremely good stamina for the Jujutsu Kaisen verse. Inside his domain, if you manage to touch him, or he touches you for some reason, you become immune to the effects of the domain. So there's that as well. Whether he's willing or not, you can become immune to it. We see this happen. There is also, of course, other weaknesses of Gojo, but for the most part, his main weaknesses come down to ways of exploiting how his techniques work. Attacking his brain directly could be fairly useful against him. You can't technically tire him out, but you can weaken him if you make him use a lot of really big stuff way too fast. Though he is still incredibly smart and isn't usually going to let that happen. And he is typically immune to mental manipulation unless you have something specifically able to counter-reverse curse technique. Generally speaking, Gojo has almost no weaknesses, but the ones he does have are pretty big, just like Nightmare. There's also how his cursed energy works. Cursed energy is negative emotional energy. Very similar to agony. In fact, they're extremely similar. They're almost the same thing. There is some notable differences between the two, but for the most part, they're incredibly similar. Positive cursed energy is different, but generally speaking, it's almost the opposite of cursed energy, meaning it's almost comparable to Remnant. Dark Remnant is closer to cursed energy than agony itself is, so this being comparable to Remnant is something that is sort of consistent. It's not the same as Remnant. There is some pretty major differences, but it does act on a similar level. So, and it's shown to work very similarly to how Remnant could work. And then in terms of power systems, Gojo and Nightmare run on pretty similar stuff, and their abilities aren't as different as they might seem on paper, though there is obviously some pretty big differences here. Obviously in stuff like skill, intelligence, etc. as well. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and play the animation. Alright, I know there's going to be a lot of questions, so let's go ahead and get this out of the way. The biggest factors in determining how this fight went were their power sets, their energies, and how they affected each other. Let's start off with stats, though, to get those out of the way. For speed, Nightmare had generally higher speed metas that were also just as backed up as Gojo's. Though Gojo could keep up, most likely. And Nightmare has less direct feats with himself to back these than Gojo does. So you could argue they're even, you could argue Gojo should be faster because of better feats, or you could argue Nightmare should be a lot faster due to far better metas in general. For this, I kind of lean towards Nightmare being faster, but regardless of how you play it, they're relatively close. Neither one is blitzing the other one too bad here regardless. Then we get to skill, and that's Gojo, no questions. Nightmare is very powerful and very intelligent, but he's not a fighter that has fought a lot. Even agony creatures with more combat experience than him aren't the best combatants. We know Gojo is comparable to literal martial arts masters, has shown some of the most insane skill sets and just skill in general in any anime, and is just pretty broken when it comes to how skilled he is as a fighter. So Gojo would take skill pretty handedly. When it comes to durability, though, yeah, Nightmare's far, far more durable. Ignoring the argument that he could potentially come back from existence erasure, which I didn't really factor in here. Nightmare can still regenerate better than Gojo can, and that should be kind of obvious. Gojo also is generally less durable than Nightmare when it comes to how durable his actual body is. Nightmare hasn't really been shown to take damage, but he should just be as durable as power output, and Agony creatures haven't really been shown to take damage from anything that isn't like Remnant, so Nightmare would just be more durable. And endurance is another weird thing, because although Gojo has very, very good endurance due to how his abilities work, Nightmare doesn't really have a limit because he could just keep taking more agony from the citizens and people of Tokyo. And yes, they'd be fighting in Tokyo. Anywhere else wouldn't make sense. Gojo wouldn't just leave Japan. It would have to be a city in Japan. Gojo typically isn't outside of cities. And why would Nightmare be somewhere without a population? Tokyo's the only place that makes sense, at least lore-wise, for both of them to be at the same time. Yes, Nightmare's from America, but Gojo isn't just going to America randomly. Regardless, they'd be fighting in the city, which means Nightmare could refill his agony very quickly, or his Dark Remnant in general. So yeah, you could argue either one for endurance, but they're both basically never going to run out of energy unless they weaken the other one. Of course, then we have actual raw power. And this one's weird, because Nightmare's going to be growing in power throughout the entire fight, and his true higher ends are completely unknown. You can argue he scales to some potential universe arguments off Eleanor, though I didn't count them here because I don't really buy them too much. There's also arguments for him being extra-dimensional or not abiding by the laws of physics, meaning that he's somehow above dimensionality. I don't buy them either. Regardless, he does scale to storms that can get anywhere from mountain to island level plus, with some people even arguing country levels for them, though generally I tend to prefer the mountain levels as this seems more consistent. And he should be above the thing that did that. Meanwhile, Gojo, he upscales similar metas. Mountain, island, country, all those arguments. The black hole arguments for planetary, I don't really buy. And a certain other argument that argues he has stupid speed, I forgot to mention that. I don't buy that either, because it ignores the context of the thing that's happening. Maybe I'll make a video on that later. Regardless, when it comes to raw power, at the start of the fight, Gojo should have the edge due to just scaling to better stuff most of the time. Though depending on how much more powerful you think Nightmare's gotten in comparison to Blackbird, or if you think he scales to Blackbird at all, some people think he should be weaker. I personally think he should be much stronger just due to the lore of the character. Regardless, Nightmare's going to start out at not a level too far below Gojo, as he should upscale this storm, so he's not like Jogo level. He's definitely above him. But as to how much, we don't know. But throughout the fight, through both absorbing cursed energy and other energies like Dark Remnant from people within the city, or maybe even hunting curses and other things like that, as he can make multiple avatars to do this mid-fight, he's going to close the gap pretty quickly, while also weakening Gojo the entire time through the UCN ability, which I'll get into later. So, raw power is tricky. I'll just call it a tie because it's very iffy on who's going to hold the edge for most of the fight. When it came to raw intelligence, I would still argue Gojo's smarter than Nightmare, despite Nightmare not being unintelligent at all. I just feel like Gojo should be slightly smarter. Not that Nightmare's dumb, he's far from it, and is one of the smartest Agony creatures in general, and one of the smartest characters in general. He should be roughly comparable to William Afton at the bare minimum. Then we get to experience. Technically, Nightmare's older, but Gojo's been fighting longer, so, it depends on what you mean by experience. And for most other categories, it's, again, tricky. Base to base, they're decently even. Where it gets kind of one-sided is when we look at abilities. Starting off, could Nightmare actually bypass Infinity? Yes, he doesn't have a physical form, but he can still interact with stuff physically. Even if he does take a tangible form, which Agony creatures can do, and he did at the start of the fight, he can still just move his hand through Infinity because he doesn't have a physical form. Before someone says the curses don't either, yes they do, and they always have. Curses always have had a physical form. It's just most people cannot see them. Nightmare can just be completely intangible if he wants to. He also doesn't abide by physics, for the most part. Literally, canonically. Just like Bonnie apparently doesn't abide by physics. Except this statement's actually canon and meant to be taken seriously, not a joke statement. So yeah, Nightmare can just bypass the physics of how the attack works, because that's just how Dark Remnant entities work. So what he is can bypass it. Ignoring that he can teleport Agony into characters to cause the UCN effect, which is a big problem for Gojo, as you'll see later, or that Agony can eat away at cursed energy. Though this wouldn't destroy the barrier, as the barrier isn't a physical thing, it's more or less an effect, it could still be a problem if he teleports it onto Gojo. So he has like 100 ways to bypass it, more than I mentioned here, and they're all extremely effective. Next, which one is more untouchable? Well, for the most part, Nightmare can't be hit by most of Gojo's attacks, though Gojo does have attacks that can damage souls and spiritual energy, meaning they should be able to affect Nightmare despite him not having physical form. Emphasis on should, because cursed energy does have a physical state. Agony seems to not. There's a difference there. Gojo should still be able to affect him on some level, seeing as he'd literally been space and time with some of his abilities, despite Nightmare also not abiding by physics, which is also very strange. Nightmare can also do the same thing, except he doesn't have to rely on a bunch of abilities to do so. He just passively can affect souls, because that's literally what Agony, Dark Remnant, and Remnant do. Everything Nightmare does can affect souls. That's just how he works. So Nightmare is not only more untouchable, but has far more ways to damage Gojo. Meaning for most of the fight, even if Gojo has a massive power gap, which he really doesn't, Nightmare has more ways to actually hurt him and far less ways to get hurt, ignoring that he can regenerate a lot better and can clone himself and do a lot of things to make him even harder to kill and can leech off Gojo. And as if all that wasn't enough, we come to one of the biggest deciding factors. Can Gojo's domain expansion even affect Nightmare? The answer is yes and no. On one hand, Nightmare would have all of the same resistances as a curse for the most part. He's essentially just a curse on steroids. His general origin is the same as a curse. He just has some very notable differences in how he functions as an entity. So he wouldn't be immune, but he'd still be somewhat resistant. Nightmare's reaction time also is likely faster than Gojo's. Even if you equalize it, he's still going to have the same amount of resistance Sukuna did for the most part. And he can attack it from the outside. You would be saying, wouldn't that stun all of Nightmare? Well, Nightmare can separate himself into multiple entities, meaning that the strain would be spread across multiple entities at once. Ignoring that these entities can act independently and as their own thing, he could also create things that aren't his own consciousness, as Eleanor can do that. So it's very possible he can just make something attack the domain from the outside, as seen in the animation with Nightmare in it. So generally, he's not going to be affected by it. He could also teleport out the second Gojo tries to use it, and with his higher speed, he's probably going to avoid it for the most part as well. Even if Gojo did somehow get it off, and Nightmare was stuck in it, and he attacked Nightmare, if he doesn't destroy all of Nightmare on every part of where the fight's taking place, it's not going to matter. So even if we did argue Nightmare's completely weak to the domain, he gets hollow purpled in the domain, any agony he left just lying around is just going to remake him. And again, there's also the whole he can potentially come back from existence erasure argument. I will keep bringing that up because it is a real thing. I don't usually use it, but you can. So that might not even work on him either. Regardless, he has an ability that can just bring him back from death, because he can just leave parts of himself outside of the domain, and he probably will anyway, as he's known to clone himself and leave parts of himself just lying around. I guess for that, I don't know. And then we get to the Yucian ability. By far and away, Nightmare's best trump card here. Why is this a major thing that matters? Well, it goes to positive energy versus agony, or Dark Remnant. In FNAF, Remnant can overpower Dark Remnant, but Dark Remnant can technically do the same, and has before. So Gojo using reverse curse technique doesn't automatically mean he's going to overpower the Yucian effect of Nightmare teleporting agony into his brain and forcing Yucian. Though it does mean it would hold it off. The problem is Nightmare's going to continuously do this passively throughout the entire fight, as Gojo continues to use more and more powerful attacks, with almost none of them being able to wipe out Nightmare. His only real win con at completely destroying Nightmare is if he uses something like a full power hollow purple and hits every single piece of Nightmare, with Nightmare's individual pieces being able to get out of the way at the same speed he would be able to. So it's very unlikely. Regardless, eventually Gojo's going to damage his brain, just by his passive attacks, and the agony's gonna get to him. Once Gojo is even in half an UCN with the agony affecting him, it's kind of over. He has no real way to do anything. It's gonna completely overhaul how fast he's gonna be unable to use his attacks. It's gonna weaken him at massively fast speeds, and Gojo's just gonna be screwed in like 3 seconds. Once that happens, Nightmare's victory is almost 100% confirmed. So while Gojo can win, and is a very, very powerful opponent, stronger than Nightmare base to base, just as fast for the most part, and has a lot of hacks abilities Nightmare would struggle with at first, he just can't outlast him, and he has no way to fully counter what Nightmare could throw at him, meaning that overall, Nightmare wins. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.